Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome everyone here this evening. It's great. We have an overflowing crowd. So if you don't have a chair, we'll make sure everyone gets a chair. It's exciting to see so many people. My name is Michael Moresco. I'm the town administrator. And I want to welcome you to Marshfield's Resiliency Workshop presentation. And I want to give special thanks to Greg Guimont, our town planner, Karen Horn, who's our assistant town planner, along with a number of our department heads, the planning board, and most importantly, the Woods Hole group that's here that will help us with the breakout sessions and all the great and hard work they've done to help us to protect our community. And also all of citizens, because without us, and we're all citizens, it's great to see so many young people here. It's really the young people who are going to be affected the most by the climate change if we can't correct what's going wrong now. The project goal tonight is to develop guiding principles and recommended policies and zoning to reduce future coastal flooding and erosion. Tonight you'll hear a number of strategies and policies that will help you deal with flooding and erosion. So for instance, we'll get into, sell your property, stop renting in high flood, erosion risk areas, purchase supplemental flood insurance, elevate your building and utilities, flood-proof your basement, build a flood battery around your home, show up and participate in town meeting, build additional stories and abandon the basement, increase on-site storage and drainage. You'll also hear a number of potential policies to achieve these goals. And they are grants for making some of the improvements that I previously mentioned, waiving of local fees, relax local regulations for building height and density, public programs to buy your property at pre-damage fair market value, land swaps, stricter regulations, and regulations limiting and prohibiting building and rebuilding in those high-risk areas. So without any further delay, I will turn the program over to Greg Guimont so that we can begin. Thank you, Greg.
Good evening, I'm Greg Guimont, I'm the town planner. First, I want to thank Carol Hamilton for assisting to get this room changed over. The senior center is under construction, it is almost finished, and unfortunately the main meeting room is also the main entrance at the moment. So it took quite a bit of work to get this redone. I also would like to thank Jason Bertner from CZM. He's here tonight. And our ad of the evening, don't forget to stop by Joe Rossi and Nancy over at the CRS table on your way out. They're right next to the door. We also have a lot of food here, sandwiches, etc., cookies. So at some point, please stop by and get something to eat. You'll hear the words MVP a lot. What is MVP? We're not talking baseball. It's municipal vulnerability preparedness. Why is this important? To have a plan in place with clear goals, policies, and recommendations, with the actions in position or already published, is very important. If we do have a major storm event, whenever we go for grants, one of the things we almost always see is this in your master plan? Is this in any of your planning documents, what you're trying to do? Having those in documents helps us when we go for money in the future. Michael's already talked about the guiding principles, the recommendations, etc. We're going to have public outreach several times and meetings. The assets and coastal risks analysis has been underway. Woods Hole and the planning staff have been doing that. The planning staff have been driving around. In the previous slide, you saw the designated area outlined in white. We've been collecting some additional data to assist them. And when we talk about Woods Hole Group, one of the reasons that we are happy to have Woods Hole Group working on this is they're also the people who spent 5 years with us improving our floodplain maps. I believe that's the correct way of saying it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to NASA and take it from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg, and thank you everybody for coming tonight. I'm Nasser Rahim, Senior Climate Resilience Specialist at Woods Hole Group. So thanks, Greg, for outlining. This is basically an overview of what the project is about. We're starting out by looking at kind of what's in the planning area, what are the future coastal flooding risks and erosion risks that the best available science is telling us we should be prepared for different stages in the future. We're looking at, the next step is to analyze what are the potential economic impacts, physical damage impacts to the assets that are there, and that includes maybe some of your homes. It includes public infrastructure, wastewater treatment facility, a variety of different infrastructure that's there. And then we're going to look at the costs and benefits of different policy scenarios. So we're here tonight to try to get feedback from you about what are the types of strategies that we should be plugging into our policy scenarios, and what can you tell us about flooding that you've experienced, that you've witnessed, so that we can verify what we're seeing in the models that have been developed so far, and also kind of what policies would help you make decisions, make difficult decisions easier in the future should a catastrophic event occur and impact the community. And this is all going to be, we're going to do this economic cost benefit analysis. We'll be back out to do more public outreach, and then this is all going to feed into what we're calling the long-term coastal resilience plan. So this project is not specifically focused on engineering strategies. There are other projects that Public Works and Planning have been involved in, and some of you may have already been engaged with those processes, looking at things like raising seawalls, repairing seawalls, doing beach nourishment, or other activities like that to kind of keep water out. This project is really looking at what if water finds its way in anyways, what if we don't prepare fast enough with physical adaptation measures on the coastline, what do individual property owners do, what does the town do with this public infrastructure. So I'm going to start out with some icebreakers, and so I'm looking for you all to participate to the greatest extent feasible. I know wearing masks is difficult, but we'll feel free to shout, and we'll do our best to hear you. So the first set of questions here is about different types of coastal flooding. The community is impacted by a variety of different mechanisms that cause flooding. So here we have a photo of a town landing, and I'm just curious if anybody can tell me why is it flooding in town landing in this photo? Is it, yes?
Extreme high tides.
Extreme high tides, that's correct. So this is the king tide. These are happening more frequently. We just had one this past weekend, so you probably noticed higher than normal water levels. And so during king tides, which happen when the moon and the sun are aligned, so they're both pulling water in the same direction, and that leads to water rising to higher than normal levels. It happens every year, happens multiple times a year, and as sea level rises, we're going to see more types of king tide flooding events, and eventually maybe that just becomes normal tidal flooding. So that's king tides for you. What about this photo? It's taken in Brant Rock. Storm drainage flooding, that's correct. So this is actually a combination. So during the king tides, there are a variety of, all our roadways, right, they discharge, they send water out from low-lying areas to the coast. And usually the water level is lower on the coast, and so water drains naturally, right? Gravity is taking that water out. But sometimes when the king tide is there, or when sea level is very high, or even during storm events, when there's surge, water actually goes the opposite direction. So if there's not something at the end of that pipe that makes sure that water only goes one way, the way we want it to go out, water will actually come in and flood low-lying areas. What about this one? Splashover, that's correct, yeah. So wave run-up and overtopping is kind of the way, it's a technical term, but basically it's splashover. Waves are hitting the seawalls, hitting revetments, etc., and there's spray that's coming over, right? And that spray, and even when the wave itself might rise up a little bit, that water is then deposited on land. And if it's behind the seawall, that means that water is not just naturally draining out. It's going to go to the low points and accumulate, and that water is going to sit there until water levels go down and the drainage system does its job. And then this is the last one. What haven't we talked about yet? Rivers. Good guess. Anybody else?
Nor'easter.
What is it?
Nor'easter.
Nor'easter, storm surge, right? So when we have big storm events, those coastal storms basically raise pressure and push water towards the coast, and that leads to water levels rising higher than normal. So this is actually taken not facing the ocean, but in the harbor side, right? So it doesn't mean, if there's a storm, it's not just the ocean that's affected. If it rises water levels in the harbor, also in the salt marshes, in the estuary, that also raises the water levels and can come over the top of seawalls and natural shorelines. All right, here's a fun one. How much has the town spent on seawalls over the past 10 years?
Michael can't answer this. 50 million.
50 million? Too high. Close. $20 million. So about $20 million. And about half of that has been debt that the town has taken on, right? And you can see that if you go to the town meeting. There's a list of all the town's debts. If you go back 10 years, you can find $10 million there. There's also another $10 million that came from the state, right? So that's grants. And the loans, oftentimes when the town gets loans from the state to do these projects, those loans are provided at very low interest rates or have a longer payback period of time. So it's a subsidy basically for the community to be able to do these types of projects that they can't do on their own, or that they could, but it would result in raising taxes higher here. So who pays for all this?
We do.
All of us, that's right. We all pay for it. So we pay for it as residents of the state, people who buy things, people who pay property taxes. Even if your rent goes to the property owner, they're paying property taxes. And so the state's getting some of those taxes, the local community is getting some of those taxes, and those are what pay for these projects. All right, so this last one, I'm going to ask everybody to stand up. All right, hopefully you can still see the screen. So this red house here represents your house. Doesn't mean that you live in the middle of the community, or you might live right on the seawall, you might live on the other side, you might not even live in the project area. So I'm going to ask you to remain standing if you have had coastal flooding in your neighborhood. So you can sit down if you haven't had coastal flooding in your neighborhood. Okay. All right, so now you'll remain standing if you had coastal flooding on your street or your block. Now, what about on your property? All right, we're getting down to the last wire, so I may ask those of you who are standing now to stand back up again in a second, depending on if everybody sits down. What about up to or around your building? All right. And then the last one, above your first floor. Lone man standing. You don't have to, but would you care to share what happened? When was this?
Sure, what year?
Most worst one.
Goodness, worst one was probably a couple of years ago. And went to the first, didn't go all the way inside, but I got about 10 steps going into my restaurant, and I hit that first level, first time I've ever seen it. After seeing about 2 dozen of these, nor'easters throughout my life. And I went over the planters, went up that first step, went right into that first middle landing. Never thought I'd ever see it go that high, so very surprised and shocked. But that was about 2 years ago.
So that's 2018,
Yes.
the last big ones we had.
Yep.
Good. Anybody else that was standing previously, was that also in 2018, or was it several times, like this gentleman said?
Yeah, I think like 2019, we also didn't come into our first floor, but it was in our heating vents are below. Our house is a little bit raised,
Yep.
and it did come into the heating vents.
Anybody else want to share a story of flooding and how it kind of given them a scare or close? Please.
The last storm, no one thought that I didn't think it was going to be a big flood. so I didn't move my car, and it was just water just surrounded it and all over my car and all over the grass and around my house. So.
Has anybody else here lost the car in a past storm? Or, you know, flooding doesn't affect all of us the same. Some of us have been more impacted. Some of us have been a little bit closer to it and experienced it. And it's important to know that your neighbors may have also had some pretty hard experiences with flooding in the past. Even though you may not have experienced it yourself, maybe some of you go to the restaurant, and so you're connected in that way. Maybe some of you use the same roads that have been flooded out and you haven't been able to get to work, or you haven't been able to get home to your families. And so it's just important to realize that even though you haven't experienced it, you never thought it would happen, it can happen, right? So I don't think anybody in New York thought Hurricane Sandy was ever going to happen, and that happened. And this community has faced a number of really impactful floods. So just try to keep that in mind as we go forward with the day. So, kind of why does this area need a long-term coastal resilience plan? The first one, the most important, of course, is danger to residents and danger to visitors. You know, the leading cause of death during floods is not from people drowning, trying to swim somewhere. It's drowning in your car. Okay, and people often think, I can just drive through this, you know, this puddle here. It's not too bad. But moving water can sweep away a vehicle, and so so having flooding in the neighborhood is dangerous. It's also dangerous for individuals that may not think this is going to be the bad one and decide to stay in their house or in their business. Maybe they're new to the community and they haven't experienced past floods before, and so they think maybe it's safe. Maybe they don't hear the evacuation orders, but you know, people are out there being rescued from their homes when these types of events happen. And that also puts our first responders in danger. They're going out wading into water, looking for people in ice storms, and that exposes them to a lot of hazards as well. It's costly, as we talked about, for the town and for the state and for the federal government and of course all of you as taxpayers. And it's costly for the people who are directly impacted, not just kind of the out-of-pocket cost, but the mental cost, the toll that it takes on you having to experience these things over and over again. And it's not just homeowners, but it's also renters who may not have insurance for their belongings when they're damaged. It's businesses who lose you know, time that they're not making revenue. They may lose inventory, and it's workers who work at those businesses or who can't get to work because they're stuck because of flooding. And finally, it's damaging to natural resources. There's erosion that happens. There's a lot of debris and trash that gets brought out, and contaminants that gets brought out and deposited into the environment. Everybody knows how much plastic there is in the ocean, but it's even here, you know, in the neighborhood. So this is kind of why it matters, hopefully, to everybody that's in this room, and obviously you're here, so you care about this. So going forward, you know, we've had a lot of bad experiences in Marshfield with past storms, but going forward, there are increasing hazards that are expected to happen over time, largely driven by climate change. You know, if anybody wants to talk about climate change or the science, I'm happy to do that. I'm not dismissing anybody. We can kind of have a sidebar at some point tonight. Feel free to come and talk to me. These are the sea level rise projections that are provided by the state, by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They're developed with world-renowned researchers who are at Massachusetts institutions. There are different scenarios for how sea level might rise based on this scientific work. And there are intermediate scenarios, which is kind of the lowest bar here, the gray line, and there are extreme scenarios, which is really kind of the worst imaginable case. So the state, Woods Hole Group has worked with the state to develop a coastal flood risk model. It's been used in Marshfield already in the hazard mitigation plan that was done just recently, as well as the community resilience building workshop that happened as part of the MVP, not baseball, community workshop previously. So it's not new to the town. We are using it in a different way in this project. The model that we developed takes into account sea level rise, in specific amounts of sea level rise. It also takes into account normal tides, the tide cycle, takes into account different storms, nor'easters, hurricanes, tropical storms that might hit this area. And it assumes that at some point later in the future, maybe mid-century or later, that storms are going to become, coastal storms are going to shift to having more kind of hurricanes. So as water gets warmer off the coast, hurricanes are able to make it further up the coast. You know, experientially, I feel like we've seen that. I feel like we've seen hurricanes coming up closer and closer. Had some some close calls with Henry this past year. So that's kind of something that's looking out into the future. So when we talk about present day, and you see maps that I'm going to show you and that you may see in future reports, we're really talking about this period of time, basically over the past 20 years or so. That's what we're calling present day. Then we have a 1.3 feet of sea level rise, which in the high scenario of sea level rise, so not the extreme scenario, but the high scenario, suggests that could happen as soon as 2030. But it could happen in the intermediate scenario as late as 2050. Okay, so there's uncertainty here. We don't know how fast people will reduce emissions, right? And reduce the amount of pollution we're putting into the environment, and we don't know how fast the environment will react to that pollution. So there's uncertainties. So we're trying to pick some time frames and some estimates that cover a range of possible futures. And then 2.5 feet of sea level rise, which could occur as soon as 2050 in the high sea level rise scenario, or as late as 2070 in an intermediate scenario. So from that information and from those different projections of sea level rise and these storms I told you about before, we estimate the probability of flooding in any given year. So you're used to hearing terms like a 100-year storm. Well, a 100-year storm doesn't just happen every 100 years on clockwork. It has a 1% probability of happening in any given year. So that's a 1 in 100 chance in any given year. And that's what you're typically seeing in your FEMA floodplain maps, 100-year flood. That's a 1% annual chance of flood. So in the present day, you can see here that light green color shows that there's large areas, there's obviously areas of higher risk, right? Those purples that you see in Brant Rock or on the Esplanade, we know that floods more than once every 100 years. But there are other areas that don't flood that frequently or maybe haven't flooded in the past that are still in that floodplain. And in present day, we think that's a pretty large floodplain. Now, as we go forward to 2030, or 1.3 feet of sea level rise, which again could be as late as 2050, we see that area that has a really rare chance of happening today could happen as high as once every 10 years. Right, that purple color, once every 10 years. And then out in 2050 with 2.5 feet of sea level rise, or as late as 2070, we see that could happen annually, every year, or in some cases every other year. And so this is kind of why a plan is needed, right? We need a plan. Doesn't mean that that's going to actually happen, or as soon as we say, or as late as we say, but we need a plan for how to reduce this risk that we're being told by best available information is coming our way. And in that far long-term time horizon, 2050 or 2070 time frame, sea level is going to be higher too, right? So there's the storm flooding, there's the annual chance flooding from storms. But there's also this potential that certain areas are going to flood at high tide every day, once a day, twice a day even. And those areas, there may be areas beyond that flood during king tides, right? That king tide flooding area may be even bigger. So we're also considering kind of areas that might be permanently inundated.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
It seems to me that Brant Rock floods at least 6 to 12 times a year. And it might be small, like even today, in fact, we had splash over. Are we here to talk about that, like what we can do as a community to ensure that doesn't happen? Is that the purpose of tonight's presentation?
It's more, I would say it's more about, I don't live in Marshfield, right? So I'm here to learn from you all. I'm here to hear you, to get your feedback, to share your stories so that we can better understand and better serve you with this plan. So the plan is not necessarily, I would say it's not about if we raise the seawalls higher, we could stop some of that splash over. Or if we put rocks in front of the seawall or put sand in front of the seawall, we could reduce that splash over, reduce it, how frequently it happens. It's more about how could the people who live in that area that is flooding very frequently, how can they adapt? How can they adapt their properties? And then how can the town support them
Okay.
in some way
I
or
mean,
another?
for example, like one of the things I think Steve and I were talking about was just that floodgate, like making certain that the town is well prepared, looking at the weather, ensuring, I don't know, Mike Moresco, ensuring that the DPW understands that those floodgates are super important to our community. And if it does flood, that the DPW is picking up the phone and maybe calling the neighbors at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So I don't know if those are sort of some of the things that we could talk about or maybe list that we could do as a community, but maybe make it a little bit stronger.
That's a great idea. Yeah, it's not one of the ones that we listed, but we do have a other or questions or comments section. We have sticky notes. So if something is missing from what you're seeing on these different stations, please, yes, give us those recommendations. Those are easy things that we can, build into the recommendations from this project. Great. All right. So there is food here. So we're going to now break out into, or in a moment, I'm going to do a little bit of explanation for some of these terms, but we're going to now go around the room. There are 5 different stations. You don't have to do them in order. We'd like to have some social distancing, so people feel comfortable. So everybody feels comfortable. We've tried to spread these around a little bit. So, take a break, have some food, go visit a station, go visit another one. We'd like for everybody to visit each station. At these stations, we're going to ask you to do things like, we're going to give you, let's say, some different colored dots, right? Some sticky dots. Where do you live? Where do you work? Where do you visit in the community, in the project area? Where does it flood already, to your knowledge, from your own experience or from what you've learned from being a member of the community? What types of flood risk reduction strategies do you favor? Not everybody is as equally at risk, so we recognize that some people are going to say, I think this is a really great idea, but doing that thing wouldn't really affect them. So we're going to be following up this workshop with also an online survey that will help us connect the dots between where you live, if you really are right there in the heart of the community that's being affected, or whether you're outside, and use that a little bit to help us put ourselves in the shoes of the people that would be most impacted. And then there's questions about what types of policy incentives do you favor. Some of those policies are carrots, right? A grant to help you do something that's helpful, and some of them are sticks. And there's something like make the regulations more strict, right? And so that's, put yourself in, again, if you don't live in the neighborhood, if you don't live in an area that's been affected, put yourself in their shoes and think, what would make me change my behavior? Would it be a carrot or a stick, or maybe both? So we'll give you 5 stickers, and you can choose 5 of the policies that you favor, 5 of the strategies that you favor. And then we have another question here that's about open space and recreation. We know that whether it's through people not wanting to deal with this at some point and selling their property to someone, the town or others, whether it is damage that occurs and there's no rebuilding, people move away, or otherwise, right? So what types of open space or natural resources or recreational uses would you like to see in the community? These could be things that are already there that you'd like to see more of, you'd like to see enhanced, or things that are missing that you'd like to see if there was an opportunity to create a ball field or a picnic area or something else, a fishing pier. Anything that you think would be a useful use of space if at some point in the future, through market forces or otherwise, that there's a change in land uses. So I want to just go through a couple of examples of some of the flood risk reduction strategies. There's someone posted at the flood risk reduction strategies. Brittany will be there. Brittany, say hello. Yes, great. And I'll be at the policies section. So if you have questions about what does this thing mean, ask us, and we will do our best to explain it. There's things here like purchasing supplemental flood insurance. So some people are required to have flood insurance by, basically you have a mortgage and you're required to have flood insurance. Some people aren't required because they own their house, or you're a renter. right? So supplemental flood insurance would be anything beyond what's required. There's only so much that the federal flood insurance will cover. So if you need more coverage because you have more stuff at risk, or you have more concern, or you want better types of protection to be able to rent a place if your house is impacted for a longer period of time, whatever it may be, there's flood insurance, there's extra flood insurance. Wet flood proofing, your basement or ground floor, that's something like, not having carpet, not having using materials in your basement or your first floor if that's at risk. Using materials that can be exposed to water without having to require everything be ripped out, right? It might be designing your outlets so that if they get damaged, it doesn't mean your whole house is out of power and that they can be relatively quickly replaced. It could be elevating an existing building or rebuilding higher. I think hopefully that's more self-explanatory. Sometimes people think, I'll just add material. I'll just fill my property, raise it higher, and then I'll be up and out of the floodplain. Sometimes the consequence of that is that water goes around your property a little bit faster than it would if your property was at the same level as your neighbor. So a way to, you could still raise your property, but if you had more space, if your lot wasn't as small, you could consolidate some neighboring properties and then raise an area of your property that wouldn't negatively impact your neighbors. That's what we mean by consolidate neighboring properties and raise grades. Building an additional story. So maybe your basement is kind of like, I can't use that as living space anymore. It's not safe to be, it's too much damage happens down there. What if you could build an additional story and abandon that basement, its use as a living space, and build an additional story so that you don't lose any living space in your home. That's what that means. And then increasing on-site storage or drainage for wave overwash. If that water's coming over the seawall, it's got to go somewhere. Can we design our properties so that it can soak up that water a little bit faster, or design our drainage system so it can not backflow, so that it can pump water out? That's what we mean by increasing storage and drainage of wave overwash. So if you have additional questions about the other strategies, feel free to ask Brittany and she'll answer your questions. We have examples of policy incentives too. So people get loans, people can get personal loans, from banks, etc., but the interest rates are quite high. So when we say loans with no or low interest, we mean it's a very low interest rate. Maybe you can pay it off over a longer period of time so that monthly payments are lower. Or maybe there's a debt forgiveness, maybe after 20 years or 30 years, whatever it may be, if you have a hardship or if you're not able to pay it back, that there's some sort of forgiveness policy. That's what we mean, this is kind of like a financing thing to make it easier and more equitable for people to be able to make these types of improvements to their properties. Property tax abatements, so the town could say, your property tax will be lowered by the amount that or by some proportion of the improvement that you do to your property to make it safer, elevating, whatever it may be. That, of course, is money that's not coming into the town, so it makes it more difficult to pay for things. But there may be a good trade-off there between having to go and rescue you from your home versus being able to get that money from you in your annual payments. Maybe you need more information, or maybe you need engineering support. You don't know contractors. You need to know kind of how can I do this? What's the best strategy to do this? Maybe there's a way for the town to provide that support as a policy support. Maybe it's really regulations limiting or prohibiting building or rebuilding in these high-risk areas. Maybe you say, look, the only thing that's going to stop me from building back the same way it was before is if you tell me I can't. And that's fine. And maybe you don't live in the area and you think, oh, we really should have stronger regulations on those people who do live in there because they're at high risk. So, we want to be able to hear all the voices that are here. Maybe you say, well, I just want to, I'll pay for it. I'm happy to pay for it. Raise my taxes. We're happy to pay for higher seawalls, happy to pay for pumping stations, happy to pay for beach nourishment. Maybe that's what you'd rather do rather than having to deal with your own property. Or maybe it's something like downgrading or disinvesting. So what if there's a single road and that road keeps getting damaged, or there's a pumping station and that pumping station keeps getting damaged, or that seawall that keeps getting damaged, and the town says, look, next time we're not going to rebuild it, or we're going to slowly scale back our investment in this asset. So please, this is the part where we encourage you to talk to each other, talk to the people that are at these stations, talk to me, or just silently go around and express your preferences here. That's totally fine too. Get some food or beverages that are over here. And once you're done, please return to your seats. We'll be kind of scanning. Once everybody's back sitting down, or if we go too long, we'll get into the next section. We're gonna carry on now.
I'm bringing it to Texas. They that was the star. The other building that I got from you got to go and you get the lobster. Oh, facts. You wanted the lobster. If you wanted.
So I don't think I can take this mic with me and walk around, so I'll try to project with my voice and maybe you guys can hear me. But I'm just going to kind of go around to the stations and just kind of give a summary, because you all were at the stations at different times. Give a little bit of a summary of kind of what I see. We'll start with this one, not in any particular order here. So people are it's just surprising. I guess you guys have enough beaches, right? Is that what I'm getting here?
Not really, yeah.
Can't add beaches?
No.
They got them on the rivers in all kinds of states. So nature areas and trails, so people appreciate having a place to go walk, maybe walk your dog, walk with your friends, do running, whatever it may be. Natural areas, so helping nature also have some space to adapt to change. I see dunes, I see seasonal camping, nature history, and education. So making sure that we're providing educational opportunities as part of these areas. So and others as well. So that's pretty interesting. I guess I'll walk around. I'm interpreting as I go, so stop me if I'm rambling too much. So here, this is flooding. Where are people experiencing flooding? So basically, all around the edge, obviously the ocean-facing side gets the brunt of storms, waves, and that's where we see a lot of stuff on the news about, the seawall failed, there's damage to a building, or all those fun news reports down here at the Esplanade and Grant Rock. So yeah, a lot of this kind of. At some point, we'll map this with that and see if things align pretty well. But I guess what I'm noticing here is just that this big area back here is not necessarily, hot red. Right? There are some experiences around the edges, but it's not hot red. But the maps I was showing you earlier suggest that in the future that's going to be an area of increasing risk. And up here in Wrexham is already experiencing flooding down here. I'm thinking maybe we just don't have as many people from Green Harbor, because I know this area experiences flooding as well. But very interesting. Over here, live, work, visit. I guess we should have extended our project boundary over here to include all of that. So yeah, as we, this kind of maps pretty well to the number of people that were still standing when we said if we have flooding, people that live in these areas along the coastline as well. In terms of visiting, the beaches, obviously a huge draw. Commercial area down in Brant Rock and Esplanade area. And that's not the town pier. So we got boaters, people boating. Other beaches here. So beaches is what I'm getting. Beaches, right? Beaches? Who goes to the beach? Yeah, I go to the beach too. That's cool. That's what I do in my neighborhood. Let's go to policies. So what kind of policy incentives do people favor? So no one's interested in land swaps. So that's interesting. No one wants to move to an area not next to the water. I get it. So grants for cost sharing. That's a big one. I may have seen someone putting all their dots in one place over here. I won't say who. Waive local fees. Interest in loans. Interest in information and engineering support. So these are all kind of financial implications, right? So if it could be made easier financially, people would do things to reduce their risk. That's what I'm getting from over here. And then there's things about local approvals. There's interest in this public space, some potential planning for properties that are bought out to be put back into community public use. Some folks recognizing that regulations would make them do something that maybe they wouldn't otherwise do. Regulations limiting or rebuilding or setting higher standards for future rebuilding. And then what kind of strategies do people favor? Lots of dots. Lots of dots over here in paying for beach and dune nourishment, annual maintenance, and monitoring. Does anybody that put their dots here want to share kind of what they were, why they were interested in this as a strategy? Paying for beach nourishment. Is it just anybody? No one? Silence? Okay. Well, I'll assume that it's kind of nice, right? If you can pay for something that stops the flooding, but you don't have to kind of deal with the issues of trying to go through regulations, trying to find a contractor to do something with your home, or try to figure out the financing of it. It's just kind of like, I'll write a check and you can help solve my problem. I totally understand that. Same thing over here, voting at town meeting for investment. So there's a lot, even though a lot of the strategies we're trying to talk about are more about kind of individual property owners or things that might be in zoning or policy incentives to help people make good decisions in terms of reducing their risk, a lot of people are still interested in kind of community scale solutions. Nourishment, seawalls, etc., things that can protect the whole community so that it's not up to each individual person to make these choices. Increasing on-site storage and drainage of overwash was a big one here. And then I would say elevating buildings, and a smaller group of folks that said sell your property or stop renting in a high-risk area. So really a lot of different perspectives, I think, cutting across the different strategies and policies. We are going to tabulate this information so we have a record of it. We're going to go home and think about it. But in addition to, I know we've asked a lot of you coming here late at night, driving in the dark because the daylight savings is gone. One of the next steps we ask that each of you do, and there are little slips of paper here on the way out. We can even pass them around. I don't know if that's acceptable or not. Touching paper on it, is that a bad thing? I used to wipe down all my groceries, not anymore. So, sidebar. Not everybody did that. I've got a 2-year-old. Concerned there. So, we'd like you to complete an online survey for the honors students. Maybe we can get your teacher to give you some more credit for being here. To fill out the survey, it should take about 10 minutes. You're going to recognize a lot of the questions. You're going to be better prepared to answer all the questions than somebody who didn't attend the workshop, because they're similar. The strategies you see there are going to show up. We're going to ask you some more refined questions, and it's going to help us just connect the dots a little bit better between where you live, whether you've experienced flooding, and the types of solutions and strategies that you support. Because we want to gather people's perspectives to understand where they're coming from. So please fill out the survey. Is that a question? Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if you can answer this or if this is part of what you're doing, but the scope of your project, does it include any of the economic factors that if you project out, you were going out 50 years, and you can kind of assume, or there's a high probability there's going to be some losses of property over the next 50 years. It could be small, little individual bits and pieces, or you had mentioned, I think in your first statement, that there might be some catastrophic things. And each of those has an economic impact to the town in terms of tax base. And then the policies, you talk about rebuilding homes that have been taken out. Is there anything in the plan that says if there is a catastrophic event and the town loses this much revenue, it also loses some expenses, but there'd have to be some formula to figure that out. Is the town willing to, what's the town going to do? What's their position? Is it to build back to have the same tax base or a larger tax base, or forego that tax base? I don't know if that's making sense to you or.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. To answer your first question, some of the next steps are doing just that. Essentially, let's say on the first part, looking at the economic impact. So the first thing we're going to do, and we're getting started with this right now, Greg mentioned that the town staff have been out, he and Karen have been out, kind of looking around the neighborhood. So one thing we know, I had this conversation with one of you, so I apologize for having it again, but one thing we know is that, houses are not all sitting right there on the floor, right? So you see a flood map that says this spot gets wet. And there's other maps we can show you that say this spot gets wet by 1 or 2 feet or 3 or 4 feet. But if your house is 5 feet above the ground, maybe the impact is not as significant. So what we've been doing is, what they've been doing, bless you, Wolf, is going around and looking, trying to get an estimate, rough estimate, nothing that we're going to hold against you as individuals or anything like that, but get a rough estimate of how high off the ground are different properties. Do properties appear to have basements or not? Those types of questions. Are they on piles or built on walls? So all that information about the buildings gets fed into a model that FEMA uses, right? When they're trying to understand what happened in a community, how much money do they need to rebuild, for example, after a big event. It's also used when a community goes and asks FEMA or another federal agency for a bunch of money, right? We say, hey, we need $20 million to do this big project. FEMA wants to know that the benefits are going to be $20 million or more, right? So this is going to give us a baseline understanding of, if we don't take any additional policy actions, what are the estimated costs, what are the estimated damages, and what are the estimated benefits? Maybe the town continues to get revenue from properties, but the town has to spend more, and individuals lose money because their property is damaged. So those types of, and we'll be looking not just at the very extreme storms, like a 100-year event, but also in the future, a 10-year event, or some of these more moderate storms, even things like permanent tidal flooding. So we're going to estimate what are the costs, what are the benefits if we don't do anything different than what we're doing right now. Then we're going to develop a couple of different policy scenarios. We're going to take some of the strategies that had more support, some of the incentives that had more support, and try to put that information together to come up with some solutions that represent maybe different, maybe some unique paths, maybe one that's more focused on maintaining the tax base. Maybe it's more about rebuilding back bigger, higher, but allowing a lot of rebuilding. Another one might be more restrictive, looking at what if the town doesn't get revenue in the future because it's more restrictive. There's more property buyouts, more money towards buying out people if they're willing to sell. So that might be a different scenario. And then you might have another scenario that's more of a mix. So then we'll be running each of those scenarios. What are the costs of that, and what are the benefits through the same kind of program. And we'll be looking to see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the results are going to show. We may be pleasantly surprised that maybe the risk isn't as bad because houses are already relatively high off the ground, or maybe we see that that it's pretty bad. Maybe it's very spotty. Maybe the neighborhood looks like polka dots. Some houses are very low, some are very high, and we see some disparate impacts. So we'll be back to share those results with you when we have it. Share the scenarios that we develop based on your feedback here, and also feedback from people who couldn't be here or who weren't aware, or people who are here seasonally. And then from the additional engagement we have with you about your feelings about those different strategies and what sounds like a good, reasonable path forward. Not everybody's going to be happy with everything. We'll develop some draft recommendations and try to explain what those recommendations mean in terms of revenue, costs, avoided damages for individuals. And that's going to be a plan, right? It's not something that the town tomorrow is going to go and implement. It's not that the town tomorrow wakes up and has $50 million to do some of these policies and programs, but it's a starting point where they can start to develop programs, start to develop plans, maybe do pilot projects, and maybe have a better system in place, be better prepared for if something happens in the intermediate period. Right? This problem's not going away. It's something that we're going to learn about over time. Which of these futures in terms of sea level rise comes to play, how people respond to increasing risk over time. So, I hate to say that you'll be back in a room like this, at some point, hopefully in your life, and having similar discussions, but hopefully they'll be about what we learned from what we did based on this plan and other initiatives that the town is moving forward. This is our timeline. We will be done by June 30th. Courtney Roca from the state is the regional coordinator of the MVP program from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. She'll make sure we're done by, I'll make sure we're done by June 30th. Greg, we'll make sure we're done by June 30th. That's the grant deadline. Again, we'll be back to speak with you, to share what we've found in May. And there'll be communications, through Greg. And if you left your email here, you'll certainly be included. And hopefully the word of mouth that got you here will be in effect as well. My contact information is here. We'll publish this presentation on the website. When we have some of this data collected, we can present that as well, and hopefully from the online survey. We're going to try to keep it up for a little while to get as much feedback as we can from as many people. If you have anything related to the program or the state or questions about these things, Courtney is your contact person. If you send me an email, I'm probably going to forward it to Greg and Karen, so feel free to forward it to email Greg and Karen, and then they'll email me. We're a circle here of people. And now I'll open it to your questions. If you have any burning questions that you want to get. If you want to have a private conversation with me, I'll be here for a while afterwards as well. Yes, please.
One other thing to say. It's also important to remember that your select board, your Board of Public Works, and especially town meeting are the ones that are going to decide what we end up doing in the long run. How we're spending our money, what we're spending our money on, how much money we spend.
Well, everybody wants to pay more taxes, so that's the biggest takeaway I got from this meeting. That's never happened before. Well, I'll say thank you. Thank you all for coming here. Thank you for the conversations that I had with you, and you probably had with each other and others. Hopefully this wasn't too tough of a way to spend your evening, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Oh, one more. Wait. One more. Yes, please.
You want to say? So we do need all the students. There is a request to have the students get together so that a photograph can be taken of you.
You survived it? Yeah, you.